So in my quest of making really fun and good-looking Halo Flashpoint maps, I was really inspired by Mantic's recent release of Rise of the Banished, and I wanted to create my own Banished map for the game. But there's only one problem. There really isn't a lot of reference out there and inspiration out there for Banished-style maps, other than a couple of games. And I wasn't going to pick Halo Wars 2 because it's an RTS and you just can't translate that. So I have to take a look at Halo Infinite. So since Halo Infinite is my only point of reference, really, let's take a look at that game and see what we can make in Halo Flashpoint. Ultimately, I actually only had 3 options. 1, make a map out of a section of the campaign, which I really want to do, but I want to save that for a different build and a different game. 2, create one of the maps Breaker or Deadlock, but unfortunately those are big team battle maps and they would not fit the scale of Halo Flashpoint. It wouldn't look good, and I couldn't find sections of the map that I would actually enjoy building and playing on in the small scale Halo Flashpoint map, so unfortunately those ones can't be done. So that left me with option 3, House of Reckoning. House of Reckoning, which first appears in the campaign, made its way into the firefight matchmaking mode in Halo Infinite. While the campaign version has a pelican in it and this very interesting pathway that cuts through the middle structure, I ended up choosing the alternate version, which has no pelican, but has a more fleshed out center structure. So the reasons why I chose this version were 1, putting a huge pelican to scale on this Flashpoint map would be too large and it would block too many camera angles, and I really am focusing on battle reports in the future and I want some good camera angles that can see most of the board all at one time. And 2, the version without a pelican is the version that they have in matchmaking for Firefight, which I assume is played a lot more than the campaign is, so I feel like it's going to be a little bit more recognizable to the players of the game. Okay, so now that I have the map picked out, I wanted to challenge myself to create a map using primarily foam and Mantic's own 3D printed terrain, because it's cheap, it's really easy to get, and it just looks banished. So I left a link in the description below if you want to check out everything in this video and that 3D printed terrain. But let's take a look now how I created this map using primarily only Mantic terrain. Alright, so first things first is I had to create the floor of the map. And if you see here, you can see it's relatively flat with some patterns kind of etched into it. So I went out, I bought a 2x2 piece of insulation foam as the base to give it rigidity. And then I actually ended up printing out these pieces that I really like. Now these are actually 2 pieces that are combined. Like I said, I have the link in the description there, but yeah, you can see how they almost exactly resemble the previous reference video that I showed with those engravings. I ended up trimming them up a little bit after putting that brim, I believe it's called, on there when 3D printing. And then I just printed out a ton of these. And actually, when you think about it, it is going to be 64 of these. I printed out 64 of these combined. And as you can see here, I ended up being able to print them without the adhesion on the build plate, just straight up. Here, I can actually show you why I chose these pieces, because not only do they look similar, but when you connect them, they actually connect and look symmetrical. So I'm able to lay them out flat on this board with some Gorilla Glue and kind of just spread that glue all over the place. I did eventually take out a paintbrush to kind of like spread everything around, just so I have even coverage when I am actually laying the tiles down on there. That way they don't get all jostled around while I'm playing. Then came probably the most satisfying part, and that was actually laying the floor tiles on the styrofoam itself, gluing them together. You can see here, this is where they kind of create those cubes, kind of a 4x4. I say 4x4, but it's really just 4 of the cubes and 1x1. But you can see how nice this turned out in the end. Then I wanted to space out these tiles just a little bit because some of them really were close together, and I want the players to be able to know exactly which cube is which tile is which, so there's no confusion on the game, and this is how it ended up. I did have a little bit extra styrofoam on the ends here that I had to trim off. That's just the nature of it being 75 by 75 millimeter cubes and not actually 3 by 3 inches. But yeah, I would definitely recommend getting a wire cutter because this has made my map building so much easier. Now that we're done with the floor, let's take a look at the main structure because in fact, this is going to be the majority of the map and we're going to use foam to kind of build the foundation for it. So the pieces you're going to need are a 300 millimeter by 375 millimeter, a 37.5 by 225 millimeter, a 37.5 by 150 millimeter, and a 75 by 225 millimeter. Simply how I was able to create these was by using my foam wire cutter, measuring it to the exact measurements that I needed, and cutting out basically 3 layers and gluing them on top of each other. This will give us that 3-inch height that we need in the Halo Flashpoint game and put it together the best way possible. Ignore how I did this bottom part. I just ran out of foam, so I measured it up to equal about the same, but this is going to be the bottom of the structure anyway. And once again, because these are 75 millimeter tiles and not 3 inches, I will need to trim off the top of these foam pieces. One, because that's what the game calls for, is 75 millimeter pieces, but secondly, because I want it to be a little bit shorter so that when I glue these tiles on there, it raises it up a little bit so the foam is not directly laying on the board, causing an uneven playing space. And funny enough, I actually had to cut the larger piece in half just so I could trim the bottom of it. But you're going to see a better layout of it all glued together later. So if you want to copy, you can do it that way. But I did end up gluing it together right here, and you can just see me measuring it out. As we are building up this main structure, the next thing that we need to look at were the walls. And they are pretty unique walls in such they will get wider as they go up to the center platform. So I had to 3D print some terrain that could replicate this, and I went to my 3D printer. I think I found some good files that would work for what we're doing, and I just ended up 3D printing them. And for each of the tiles I selected, I left the count of how many you will need on the screen for you to see. Just make sure the pieces are 75 millimeters by 75 millimeters, or the half pieces are 75 millimeters by 37.5 millimeters. Yes, even the stairs can be 75 by 75 or 75 by 37.5. So these wall pieces actually have these little protruding nubs that come out. So we're going to want to imprint those into the foam. That way they don't stick out when we glue them in, and it's a nice snug fit. Then I use a combination of hot glue and Gorilla Glue to really stick those wall pieces onto the side of the structure. That way they weren't moving around and falling off while I was putting on the other wall pieces. Every one of these flat wall pieces were going in the spot that the stairs are going to be residing. That way, when I'm using the angle pieces, the stairs aren't colliding with it at all, so it looks a little bit neater. So we're going to do the same method of hot glue and Gorilla Glue and just press those in on all the sides that I'm going to be putting those stairs in. And from there, I finished putting on all the wall pieces. And since I left empty spots for the stairs, I was able to glue those right in there. Don't worry about the stairs being exposed right here. We're going to solve that very, very soon with putting some triangular pieces in there to block the empty spaces that you can see up from underneath. But yeah, you'll want to support it a little bit more by putting a little bit more glue on the bottoms. I don't do it right here, but I did end up gluing these stairs to that 3D printed wall piece as well. I actually had a lot of issues deciding what I was going to make these triangular pieces that are going to block the empty spaces on the stairs. And I ended up using this X looking design on one of the floor tiles and filling in the extra holes. So you can see me sanding it down here so the edges aren't so rough on it. Looks a little bad once you see it after I sand it, but I promise everything came out really smooth, and I just glued those in there. That way everything was closed off, and it looked a lot better. And, you know, started with the X design and ended up looking pretty good. I did want to test it out with one of the miniatures, so I got a good old Master Chief, the Flood version, and I kind of put him in there. He does fit, which is nice, but this is how it ends up looking with all those wall pieces, the stairs, and the floor combined. Looking pretty good, if I do say so myself. But next, we're going to start wanting to make these objects on the main structure, starting with this crate and stairs. You will need to 3D print the following number of crates and stairs to achieve this object, but overall this is a really easy one to make. These ones I just ended up hot gluing together because they didn't need to be as sturdy, and that hot glue is pretty strong, but you're just going to want to hot glue these two bottom ones together and then hot glue another one resting on top. This way it gives the map more elevation, and it is a legal 1 cube up. And don't forget to add the smaller cube and the stairs to complete this object. Next, I want to take on the biggest challenge, and that is this kind of centerpiece of the main structure, and it's the UNSC building that you see here with the antenna on it. I wanted to create this one out of foam. I wanted to get away from just 3D printing everything and actually create something out of foam. So I measured it up and I cut out a few pieces with the foam wire cutter. And what I started off with was the roof of the structure, the bottom of it, and the pillars holding them together. So you can see here I'm actually cutting out the bottom. It's going to be very thin because I don't want it that high up. And then I go ahead and cut out some of the pillars just by cutting out these really tiny blocks and then cutting them in half. This is going to be repeated a few times just to get about 4 pillars. And I'm just going to use hot glue again to put the styrofoam together here, and we're going to put these pillars on the front portions of the map. Now, I've made a little bit of a mistake here because they didn't end up being tall enough to be Atriox friendly with his giant chain breaker hammer, but that's okay. It really didn't end up taking all that long to make those pillars taller again, and they look much better because of it. I did end up putting a very thin backing onto the structure itself. This is very accurate to the actual structure in the game. We don't want anyone being able to go in and out from the back area. And it was time to glue on the top, which I just ended up making probably about like a 2-inch block on top of there. I had to line up all the pillars to make sure they fit correctly and there was less seams as possible. And here we go. You can see me whipping out Atriox again and testing him, and he fits in there very smooth, perfect, no scratching on the top at all, and it's wide enough for him to go all the way through because this is in fact a banished map, and Atriox is going to be used on it, so he needs to be able to go everywhere. Then I took a slightly different approach on the top of it. This was using no accurate measurements, but I ended up just trimming an angle onto the top of this piece here and gluing it onto the ceiling to give me that angled look to it. I went ahead and trimmed off the pointy portion of the ceiling and then put another thin piece on there just to add some other variance to make it look a little bit more human looking. And I ended up calling that one good for now. Then next up was this slightly raised platform that you see here. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any railings through Mantic's terrain that ended up fitting this perfectly, but I did find some, and this is how many that you're going to need of each of these pieces here, because otherwise you're going to be using foam for the main structure of it. And we're going to glue, you can see I'm gluing another wall piece on there, but I do end up changing it later on. Then I glue these side pieces here, which I really like a lot. They actually do fit in well with the Mantic terrain, and they look almost identical to what they had in the actual structure itself. And this great floor piece I ended up getting from a terrain crate box that I had in my closet, and I detached a part of the stairs that I 3D printed out, glued them to the bottom, and that was the finished piece So I put it on the board to see what it would look like. And the last thing I ended up creating for this map in this video was the nice boulder, the nice rock piece that we have on the map there. I ended up using the stationary wire foam cutter for this one just because I didn't want to take out my handheld one. And I just kind of worked the styrofoam pieces around. I glued two together and just trying to make it as rocky as a formation as I could. This did take a long time. I did have my back door open to vent out all of the fumes and the smoke that are coming off from it, but there's no real art to this. Just put it in there, shape it however you want to. It took me a while to get what I wanted, but eventually I was able to put it on there with some smaller rock pieces that I glued around the edges. This will be improved hopefully in the future to become a little bit more realistic, but this was kind of the basic idea. The rock, I wasn't super happy with how this one turned out, but you can put models on it, and it's a rock, just like in the actual game. So here it is. This is what I have so far on the House of Reckoning map. I'm really happy with how it ended up looking, and you can get a pretty good idea of how it's going to play once it is all finished, but so far I think it's looking great. Alright, so now that all the heavy lifting is done on this map, the next video is going to focus on really bringing it to life and finishing it by painting it and adding scatter and all those details that we know and love about the map. So if that is something that you want to see, make sure to subscribe and like the video. If you want Halo Flashpoint to grow, that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, thanks for watching and tune in next time. Peace.